I was just standing on Old Compton Street, and then I saw the explosion come out from the right-hand side, maybe 150 meters away, something like that. And then I saw the sort of general chaos ensue, and then I felt this sort of emotional wave hit me in the chest, and that sort of brought me out of the experience, and I went into a sort of void state. So I was teaching these people how to do it. They'd noticed something was happening, and so they were sort of trying to coax me back from this experience. And I started to come back into the room, and I slowly came back to normal. And then we made a circle, and I described to them what had happened and described what I'd seen and the emotions, and I had this strong feeling that it was precognition. And then 5 days after that, the bombing on Old Compton Street happened.
In today's episode, I'm joined by Graham Nicholls, a leading explorer of out-of-body experiences. From his early experiences as a teenager to decades of research and teaching, Graham shares how this extraordinary state has shaped his life and understanding of reality. We talk about the techniques that he's developed, the emotional and creative impact of his experiences, and how science is beginning to explore consciousness in new ways. He even shares his precognition and shared death experiences. Stay tuned. This is an incredible conversation. Okay. Wow. First of all, Graham, really, really happy to have you on here. I'm super, super excited about talking to you. As I mentioned offline, I first came across your work on, I think it was the Area 52, Chris Ramsey's kind of podcast. Well, it was a bit of a documentary, I think, actually, about out-of-body experiences. And I must say, I'm sure other people will maybe felt the same, but I got goosebumps when listening to some of your sort of more deeper experiences, especially the precognition stuff on Old Compton Street and the nail bombings and stuff. And I'm sure we'll get onto that. But I was just wondering if we can maybe start with your early experiences, because you actually started, if I remember correctly, having out-of-body experiences around, or training yourself to have out-of-body experiences around age 13. Which is super, super young. So I don't know if you could tell us a little bit about that, and then we can talk about how that all enveloped.
Yeah, I don't know why I was so focused on it at that age, to be honest. I can't really recall what it was that sort of drove me to sort of say, right, I'm going to really commit to doing this, because I wasn't really very studious at school or anything like that. I was kind of it was quite different to my normal personality in a way to do that. So there was something driving me that I don't know where that came from. But I'd had a few initial out of body experiences when I was around 11. I can't be exact. I think it was about 11 years old. And then a couple of years later, I discovered the whole concept of out of body experiences and astral projection and that kind of stuff. I think I saw an article on it in a newspaper, something like that. So I realized that's what had happened to me, and I wanted to learn how to do it. I think the article was saying that, you can learn to do this intentionally. So that just really fascinated me. And I think the article said that it takes quite a long time to learn it, around a year or something like that. So I said, okay, I'm going to put myself into that position, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to commit for a year to really try and learn to do this. So that's basically what I did. And as far as I remember, I did it every single night, like, did the work every single night from that point on. So yeah.
And so at that point, so obviously the article, the fact that you'd had these, I guess, spontaneously before, an article that you read really kind of helped you to identify that that was the experience that you had, and then you went down that journey. What books did you go and look and seek out? You know, this
Yeah.
books and training on how to do it. What did you do?
Well, the first book I always credit is Out of Body Experiences, a Handbook by Janet Lee Mitchell. which was the first one I ever read. I remember where I bought it, everything. It was in James Street, just off Oxford Street. There was the big bookshop there, and I went there and I looked in there. They had pretty much nothing on those kinds of topics. It wasn't like a specialist bookshop or anything like that. I later discovered shops like Watkins in London that, have all those kind of books. But at that point, I didn't know about any other shops. So I went in there and they had this one book on the topic, which was quite lucky in itself because in ordinary sort of mainstream bookshops, you don't really see that much on out of body experiences. So I was quite lucky that was there. And then I bought it and read it cover to cover. It was mainly looking at things from a science perspective. It was talking about experiments that Janet Lee Mitchell had done, and also work with Ingo Swann, the famous remote viewer. So it was sort of looking at all these different experiments and going through it, and that was really inspiring. And it had one technique, which was basically imagining you were floating on clouds, and that was it. That was the only technique. And that
Wow.
was the one I used, and that was the one that actually worked in the end. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best technique, but it was the only one I had at the time, so I kind of went with it. Um, and then probably just after managed to induce my first experience, which was basically I relaxed for the first time. I had this concept that I needed to kind of make it happen and sort of force it to happen almost. And on this occasion, I just relaxed and kind of let go. I think because in a way I thought, oh, it's not going to happen. And I sort of had semi given up, as a lot of people do get to that point. And I just let go. And it was actually letting go and just sort of relaxing that led to it actually happening. And I felt this huge surge of energy, felt like a lightning bolt, something really, really intense, not painful or anything, but just intense. And then found myself in a sort of horizontal position directly above my body, looking down at myself. So quite a classic out of body experience. But I remember that I couldn't move other than like rotating, like there was a pole running through my head and out of my feet. So all I could do was sort of rotate like that. And then there was a sort of bluish, greenish sort of tinge in the room. That could have been moonlight. I'm still not sure whether that was some kind of energy or whether it
Yeah.
was light coming through the window. Um, but anyway, there was this kind of tinge to the room, and I could see myself on the bed, and I looked. It looked like me, but I didn't. I didn't consider it me. The way I would describe it is like if you looked at a photograph of yourself, you know that it's you and you identify with it, that it's you, but you don't think, oh, that's the real me and I'm the one looking at the picture, I mean, that's the real you and not the one looking at the picture, I mean. So that kind of feeling, I guess. Um, and then it probably lasted a minute or something, and then I was just back in my body, sort of just felt myself drawn back into my body. But after that, it was a bit like the floodgates had opened and I started to have more and more experiences. And it was much easier after that because I kind of knew what I was looking for. I think one of the difficult things in inducing experiences is if you've never induced one, you don't really know what you're trying to do, so you're kind of feeling in the dark in a way. Whereas on this, after I'd had that experience, I knew what I was looking for a lot more, so it was easier to induce the experience.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact that you'd had spontaneous ones before, I guess that could help that helped to drive you on as well. Do you know how long it took for you to have that first experience?
6 months, yeah.
6 months. Okay. And you were doing it every day for wow, wow. Oh, and does it feel like it was yesterday? Does it almost like, was it such a vivid, like for you in terms of your memory and your recall? Is it?
The experience is very vivid, but that whole process doesn't feel like yesterday. It does feel like a long time ago, but the experience is very vivid because it was it was very intense, and it was sort of the first experience. So it I guess that always stays with you. I say the first experience, the first induced experience. It wasn't my first
That's interesting.
ever
Yeah,
experience.
for sure. And so, what happened after that point? Like, how did you? So, did you continue with that technique? Did you
No,
manage to kind of? No.
no. I after that, quite soon after that, I found that there was a lecture happening on astral projection in central London by a teacher called Douglas Baker, who was a pretty prolific author and came from a kind of theosophy background, sort of esoteric tradition sort of background. So I went along to his lecture, and I started attending more and more of the things he was doing, and eventually he sort of took me under his wing and gave me my first job working, sort of helping him out with his astral projection lectures, and um, selling books and things like that at his events, helping with setting it up and stuff. So he became kind of my mentor at that time. So I probably worked with him for the next maybe 3 years. And during that time, he recommended books. I found books myself. I discovered specialist bookshops. So I was, at that point, I was spending pretty much all the money that I made, I was spending on books to, go deeper into the topic, and was reading on like everything to do with esoteric stuff, like everything I could find from, yeah, from mythology through to different cultural practices through to science, parapsychology, you name it. I was kind of researching all of it.
Okay. And did you connect the dots across all of these different, verticals, let's say? Or was that through, your mentor? Like, how did you sort of, yeah, or did you just, I don't know, were you pulled towards other areas in this space, let's say?
Um, I guess I had sort of areas that maybe interested me more than others, but I was and I did see a connection between a lot of the practices. I guess I saw that that what you see in maybe, I don't know, a shamanic practice from um halfway across the world, they were essentially doing the same processes and methods that I'd either intuitively developed or had learned through books and things like that. So yeah, it just all seemed to be very natural. There were different, I guess, different packaging, different flavors to the different approaches and different practices, but the core of all of them seemed to be very consistent. So that sort of started to be how I looked at things. And I guess I became more and more drawn to a more scientific outlook, because more and more I found that belief systems would just get in the way. People would come with, oh, I believe this, and then you'd find contradictory experiences, or you'd have an experience that contradicted that. And so that would make me less drawn to maybe the more esoteric traditions, and maybe more to a mixture of my own personal interpretation and the science. So that's kind of how I ended up looking at it.
Got it. Okay. And I guess, in fact, I had a question which was more around the community side of things, because I was like, okay, you have these experiences, you're quite young. Who do you tell? Like, did you speak to friends, or did you kind of go more into, I guess, the community that you, I guess, inherited as part of, sort of, yeah, going under the wing of your mentor and all of those things.
Well, I didn't really get involved in his community. I was just sort of him, really. Like, I think some of the other people that worked with him maybe found it kind of strange, this young. I mean, I was like 14, 15, that kind of age. So it was pretty strange for them, I think, that I was so focused on these things. So yeah, but I communicated it to all my friends, really, my family, everyone. I was pretty obsessed with it at that point. So yeah, I talked about it to everyone, probably too much to be honest. But
Sure. And how did they respond? Like, was anyone in your family or your friendship group interested in, yeah, learning
for
more
sure,
about it?
yeah. Like some people in my friendship group, I taught how to do it.
Okay.
Um, I I sort of yeah, brought friends to some of the lectures that Douglas Baker did. Um, I I spoke to my family. My family were probably the least interested. They were open and supportive of the things that I was interested in, but they were they are very simple working class Londoners. Didn't really have any particular interest in that kind of thing, but were maybe open to look at it or to be open minded to it. But they weren't believers, or you know they weren't particularly into it. They weren't religious or anything like that.
Okay, so from 14 years old, you're under the wing. Was it Mr. Baker? I can't remember what you
Douglas
said.
Baker, yeah.
Douglas Baker, that was it. Um, how did you go from, learning as a young kid how to do this and being really, I guess imagine obsessed with it and really like, honing the skill and trying different things to actually teaching it? What sort of, oh, no, actually, or even the precognition experience, or experiences that you had. What did that path look like?
Um, well, I guess I was just consistently practicing at this point, and I think when you do practice consistently with any of these kinds of things, you start to have experiences that are maybe beyond what you were initially thinking about or what you think is possible. Things just start to open up, I think. So that's really what began to happen. I found that I would have initial objective, more veridical experiences. So the first one I had was near Portobello Road Market, Bayswater Road. Off of there, I had an experience where I went into the upper floor of a terraced house and was able to perceive the details of the person who lived there. I saw a name and some basic details, and I'd also seen the West 11 sort of code on the postcode on the wall of the buildings as I'd gone past. So that also gave me a sense of exactly where I was. And then I was able to verify that afterwards in the yellow pages, because this is pre-internet.
Yeah. Wow. So you were and okay, so that would you say that the precognition sort of experiences, was that the next almost like, I don't know, level or layer that opened up for you?
Yeah, because that first experience had this cerulean quality. I call it the cerulean state. It basically this green, blue gray light quality or visual quality where everything seems infused with this bluish tint.
Mm.
That was the first experience that I'd had with that. And then the Soho experience, which was when I was teaching the G technique for the first time, which was this technique I'd invented that used muscle tension and breathing techniques to create what I now know is probably the pre-state of an out-of-body experience, because you have to be in the right mental, physical state as well. It's not just a lot of people get too caught up in techniques, but I actually think the techniques are not the most important part. Um, but anyway, so I was using this method where you get yourself into this pre-state, and I went into a very deep trance and came out of body initially started off in a natural environment. Don't know why that was the case, but started off in this natural environment for probably a couple of minutes, and then that experience seemed to almost like break. It literally felt like there was a kind of ripping open or break or like kind of switch from one experience to the next. And then I found myself just standing, so there was no flying or OBE elements as such at this point. I was just standing on Old Compton Street, well, on the corner of Moore Street and Old Compton Street. There's a sort of triangle of pavement that sort of juts out. And I was looking straight down the road. The Apollo Bar was on my right, the restaurant, Italian restaurant. And then I saw the explosion come out from the right-hand side, maybe 150 meters away, something like that. And then I saw the sort of general chaos ensue. And then I felt this sort of emotional wave hit me in the chest. And that sort of brought me out of the experience. And I went into a sort of void state where I was half in the room, I guess, half out of the room, but I was sort of in a rudimentary level of consciousness. There was no clear visual or mental activity going on. But slowly, especially one person who was there, so I was teaching these people how to do it. There were four other people there. And Chris, one of them who was there, and another friend called Lawrence, were sort of they'd noticed something was happening, and so they were sort of trying to coax me back from this experience. So they were sitting next to me. I was sort of laying on the floor, and they were coaxing me back. And Chris especially seemed to be able to get through to me at one point, and I started to come back into the room, and I slowly came back to normal. Um, and then we made a circle, and I described to them what had happened and described what I'd seen and the emotions, and I had this strong feeling that it was precognition, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why I felt that. And I'd never had anything precognitive before, but I had this strong feeling that it was something that was going to happen. And then 5 days after that, the bombing on Old Compton Street happened in the Admiral Duncan pub on the right hand side of the road. So all of the details were correct that I'd seen in the experience.
But that's such a mind-blowing experience, isn't it? I can't even imagine how you felt after that, but also the people who were in the room, because the fact that you were teaching people at that point of time, that's the thing that's so mind-blowing. Did you so yeah, once it actually unfolded in reality, what was the conversation like between you and the friends or people that you were teaching? Did you discuss it? Did you go through the events in more detail? What happened?
I think maybe there was a degree of denial. We didn't quite know how to talk about it, I think, to be quite honest. We did talk about it, especially with Lawrence. I ended up making a video with him where he talks a bit about it as well. If people want to see uh, his side of it, that's on my YouTube channel. But yeah, so especially with him, and I guess I was also trying to get my head around the whole concept of precognition because I didn't really believe in such a thing or see how such a thing could be possible. So that was a real stretch for me, what was going on there. So I guess we had conversations about physics. We had conversation about whether is it one potential future? Could it have been something else? Like I somehow experienced the intention of the person who did the bombing. Did I somehow like go into his mind, or there was lots of things that we went through trying to unravel what might have happened, and how we could sort of explain it in some way.
Yeah, with your, I mean, obviously, I guess you've had more sort of similar kind of experiences since. knowing what you know now and the experiences that you've had, do you have a view, obviously not objective view, but subjective view of what you think it might
To be
be?
honest, I'm still quite on the fence with it. I'm
Okay.
still I do think there is some form of precognition. So I guess I've become more comfortable with that. I've done a lot of research into, for example, the work of Dean Radin. So he's done work at the Institute of Noetic Sciences looking at uh, what he calls presentiment, which is more feeling the future or an unconscious reaction to a future event. So he'll set up an experiment. So there's going to be an emotionally intense image shown randomly at some point to the participant. And what he looks for is unconscious reactions. So it might be something like the pupils dilate, or it could be something like uh, skin conductance changes, something like that. And so he'll monitor these different things, and these different unconscious reactions will show that the person is aware that there's going to be something intense coming in a few seconds later. So that's only dealing with margins of a few seconds, but it does show that something's going on because there's this reaction that happens prior to the actual image being shown, and
Yeah,
then
that's in line with the type of emotional response. Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. And then
Interesting.
when there isn't an intense image going to be shown, they don't have the reaction. They just have like a uh normal reaction. So that's one example. I then also took part in controlled experiments. So this started in about 2008. I had this conversation with a skeptic, and they were like, well, if this is true, why don't you get involved in science and sort of prove it? So I was like, okay, I'm going to do that then. So I reached out to Rupert Sheldrake, who does experiments on telepathy and all these kinds of things. And I ended up organizing a range of telepathy experiments with him. And and then I took part in some of his experiments, including one on precognition. And in the precognition test, I got the highest score that he'd ever seen in a single test. So that again, and that's under controlled conditions. It's a computer controlled experiment. So there's no way anyone can tamper with it. He can't tamper with it. You can't tamper with it. It's just run automatically. So that was sort of some of the first experiments. So that was in about 2008. I started doing that. Um, And then I've done more experiments since. So with Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, I did micro PK experiments where they put me into a Faraday box, like a kind of steel room. It's like almost like a cell. They kind of lock you in this big steel room, but it cancels out all of the signals, basically. Any mobile phones or any kind of signals like that can't get through. Um, and then I also did experiments with the Ryan Research Centre, so which that was based on remote targets, but was also precognitive in nature. So that was over 14 weeks. So that was a really big study. Um, so yeah, so now I've been involved in all kinds of research.
Sure. And all of those experiments that you listed, were those using your the G technique that you developed, or was that, or were they
No, I use all kinds of different approaches. I tend to be, and I advise this of the people I teach as well. I tend to be more use the method that's correct on that particular day. Or so for example, if I'm super relaxed and feeling super like positive and chilled and energized or whatever, then I'm probably going to go with a method that works with that. Whereas on another day, let's say I'm like really physically exhausted, I would maybe work with that. Another day, I might be mentally stressed. So I might need to do something to address that stress and to use a method that's maybe de-stressing to some degree. So I tend to, the first stage of inducing an OBE, in my opinion, is observing the state that you're in to begin with. That's your starting point. That should be your starting point always, I think.
Okay,
So,
that's super interesting. So you've learned a lot about yourself, obviously, through this process. No, I mean, when I've talked a little bit in the past. So my brother, one of my older brothers, sorry, he introduced me to this about 20 years ago, and he was able to also induce his own experiences, at will, pretty much. And his whole technique was around waking up in the middle of the night and then, setting an alarm, reading a book or whatever, and then he would kind of manage to induce it. And over the last year, I've been trying to do similar kind of things. I would be able to bring about the what do you call it? Uh,
vibrations.
yes, the vibrations. But after that point, it would be difficult. So it would be, touch and go. Maybe I'd have a kind of experience and, that kind of thing. But certainly the sleep paralysis or whatever you call it, I was able to induce that fairly often, at least maybe once every other week. I have stopped. I've paused for a little bit now. In your opinion, so the inducing of vibrations, you think is a lot to do with your state? I think that's quite interesting. Can you go into that a little bit,
Of
please?
course it is. I find it bizarre that people would think it isn't, you know.
Mm.
It I mean, anything like that's going to be, I mean, again, I don't see human beings and us as kind of cut off sort of systems, we're affected by our environments. We're affected by, like, day to day, our emotions and our diets and all these different things that we do have an impact on us. And that will then affect our sleep. It will affect our stress levels. It will affect our emotional state, all of which will have an impact on your ability to have an out of body experience or not. Um, so I think the physical body aspect of it is really, really central. Getting that right is what allows the experience to unfold, I think. What most people seem to see it almost like this mechanistic thing of just doing some techniques, or
Yeah.
if you think about the sleep interruption, which I I may have invented, as far as I can tell. Because I started doing that when I was about 16. And I came up with the idea of getting up in at sunrise was how I did it. So what I would do is I would get up at sunrise and I would go out into the garden. This was not when I was at my home. I grew up in a tower block, but when I went away on a trip when I was a teenager, we had this garden at the place I was at, so I used the time to do my practice, and I went out into the garden at sunrise, and I did a sort of meditation as the sun was coming up, and I would say affirmations about having an out-of-body experience and becoming lucid. So this was a method to use lucid dreams because I'd never done it via lucid dreams before. I'd always done it from the conscious state for the sort of 2 years or so previous. So I was kind of curious because some people, a very small minority at the time, were talking about lucid dreams. Now it's sort of the predominant thing, but that's the internet's influence. Before that, that wasn't the case at all. Um, so I wanted to learn to do it in this unusual, novel way. So I thought I would work on that. So I would get up, do the affirmations in the garden with the sun coming up, and then when the sun was up, I would go back to sleep. This was in the summer. It was probably like 4 or 5 in the morning when the sun was coming up. And then I would go back and I would sleep for a few more hours. And that would then allow me to go into a lucid dream state and then an out of body experience state, or directly to the out of body state. So that was sort of how I intuitively came upon the whole idea of sleep interruption, or waking up in the early hours.
That's fascinating. And going back to what you were saying around the body, or the sort of like what so reducing stress, anxiety, getting into as relaxed a state as possible. Are there any, like, a couple of tips that you might say around like how best to do that? I've heard about, like, the amount of water that you intake, like keep having that decent having a decent intake of water. There any things that you
Um, well, I think a whole food plant-based diet is probably like a key one I recommend. Um, in terms of nutrition and stuff like that. Um, I would say the thing with it is it does depend on you, and it depends on where you are in that particular moment. So in terms of tips, I mean, the way I look at it is if you think about the types of states that people tend to have out of body experiences naturally. Um, so putting aside the ones we don't want to think about, like cardiac arrest, um, people tend to, in shamanic cultures, they tend to access the out of body experience via exhaustion, often through dance or drumming or something like that, to the point that they're kind of exhausted, or sweat lodges, or in uh, Estonia, where I used to live, there's a like the sauna probably had a spiritual significance in the past. So like again, a kind of hot space that you would go into. Um, there's sensory deprivation tanks. People often have out body experiences naturally in that way. So if you think about it, they have this characteristic of kind of pushing the body beyond the comfort zone to some degree. All of these methods, or natural or more historical ways that people would get to that point, they have these certain characteristics. And so I've tried to identify as much as I can what these characteristics are, and how we can kind of access them. And so I think focusing on that and researching how to get yourself as deep into trance states, and literally practicing trance states and things like that, would probably be my tip.
Okay. It's really interesting you say that, actually, because I've seen definitely correlation, or in the past really been thinking about, like you said, dark rooms. I think even Rupert Sheldrake has a book, is it X number of ways to go beyond or something. And there's, people talk about, okay, these sort of drug induced ways, which I don't really want to touch on, but whether it be magic mushrooms, you hear stories of that, but also silent retreats, to your point, almost like pushing your body to these states of, yeah, whether it's deprivation or sleep deprivation, no, deprivation tanks, is it? Something like that.
Sensory deprivation,
Yes,
but yeah, sleep deprivation is part of it too. That's
well,
another. So I think that is what, those are the kinds of things that get you to the pre-state,
yeah.
the pre out of body. And that is the most important part, because once you're at that point, then the latter stages, using a technique or any of that kind of stuff, becomes much simpler. And whatever technique you decide to use at that point, in my book, the practical book, I've got a lot more about how to actually select the right technique for the individual. So again, people are different. Some people are more physical, some people are more mental, some people are more visual, like there's different traits to how people work, and using the trait that makes the most sense for that person is the best way to go.
It's going to be a question, actually, at the start of this, because you talked about when you were younger that actually, when you first discovered out of body experiences, and it wasn't your natural sort of tendency to kind of go down that path. I was going to ask, like, are you more visual? Are you more of a feelings person? How would you describe yourself, your natural tendency?
It's actually kind of tricky, um, because I used to always think of myself as being more visual, because I've generally thought of myself as sort of maybe coming from, because I was very into art and things like that in the past. Um, but in more recent years, I've started to doubt that and think I'm more, I work more with the written word things more now. And I also write, as well as my books and stuff, I write poetry and I kind of write, stories, and, I kind of use the written word more. Um, and then I do respond very well to maybe the sort of more physical approaches. The G technique I would categorize as a physical technique. And I've always been quite physical. I kind of was into sport when I was younger. I was a sprinter, and when I was a sort of young teenager, I used to train with Linford Christie and
Wow.
that
Okay.
kind of stuff.
Yep.
And then I moved into martial arts, and I trained in martial arts for years. And so I've got sort of a background in that sort of thing. Did yoga as well, like the physical side of yoga for a while. So I've explored many of those sorts of areas. So the G technique, in a way, I would say somewhat stemmed from those types of practices. Uh, so yeah, so I think I would put myself more in the physical category now.
Okay. And actually, just speaking about technology you've developed, obviously over the years you've developed different methods and techniques, as you said, to also go along with, I guess, your feelings and well, how the state of being and things. Can you tell us more about the technology you've developed and maybe more recently, you know, I think is it infraliminal sound technique that you've developed? Maybe just go into that.
Sure. Well, what happened was, again, thinking about how to get people into the right state. So the same year that I had the precognitive Soho experience, so 99, I was at university at the time and I was doing art. Um, and so I built this structure that was a sort of steel frame with a bed-like platform in the center that lifted the person off of the ground. And then at the time I was studying hypnosis, Ericksonian hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming. So I was very interested in how hypnosis could be used. So I created this track that had hypnosis elements on it to try and help take the person into an out of body experience. And the hypnosis did help, but it somewhat didn't take the person deep enough. So I thought, well, what else could I add in there that maybe would help? I'd explored binaural beats, but I hadn't really found them very effective for me. They didn't really do that much other than make me feel relaxed. And I wanted something a bit different to that. But I also thought, well, sound is an interesting tool. So what if I use neurofeedback? So I got this very basic sort of neurofeedback set up, um, which was on a computer. So you put like an EEG device on, and then it would give you sort of a readout of what's going on with your brain waves. So I then experimented with the frequencies, different frequencies, and just saw what got me the closest to the type of brain waves I would experience when I was in the vibrational state. So over time, I created frequency patterns that were very similar to the frequency patterns that I would get when I was in the vibrational state. Um, so I then combined that with hypnotic suggestion, but in a sort of subliminal way. So I put them right on the cusp of hearing. So you wouldn't really be conscious of someone talking. It was more just like on the edge. So I mixed that with the frequencies, and then um, it became more effective, and it would get people to the vibrational state. Um, so then over time, I refined it. And so more recently, I've added in infrasound. So probably in about 2012, I was researching infrasound because they found that infrasound might have an impact on the temporal lobes and might have an impact on people having unusual experiences. So I started to combine in infrasound with the subliminals, and so that's why I call it infraliminal. It's kind of a
Okay.
mixture of the two. So that's kind of how it came about. And yeah, I also did a virtual reality installation at the Science Museum in like
Nice.
20 years ago as well, which was designed to kind of reproduce some of my experiences in London and some of my kind of psychic perception of London.
Got it. And when thinking about, like, so for example, with your technology with the infraliminal technology, do you find it, and what you were talking about earlier around different techniques responding better with different people, do you find that the infraliminal technology works better? Uh, yeah. Or does it, well, when people are more relaxed, or does it sort of cut across that?
You need to tune into it, is what I tend to tell people. It's if you work with it, then it works for the majority of people. Um, if you just lay there and kind of think about what you're going to have for dinner, or you're just sort of expecting it to do it all for you, then that's not going to be very effective. But if you try to attune your mind to it, you see it almost like a sound meditation, and you try to take your consciousness with the frequencies, you kind of work with it, then it's a very effective tool to get people to the vibrational state.
Okay. No, brilliant. Um, and yeah, so these days, what are you up to? Yeah, are you up to any experiments? Where is the science at the moment? Do you feel that things are moving in, a positive direction from the science perspective in terms of being able to verify some of these states? What's your view?
The science is still, unfortunately, very underfunded. There's not a lot of engagement from scientists. Um, Patrizio Tresoldi in Italy is probably the main person who's doing actual work on veridical experiences. I did publish a paper with him, and he's sort of always doing work like that. I think the tricky thing with the science, I end up sort of self-funding nearly all my research, because there's no way to really get funding for a lot of this kind of thing. But I do work regularly with the Ryan Research Center in the US. I uh, I teach a class with them every year. I do lectures with them, and when research comes up, I get involved in their research. I'm on the advisory board as well, so they're the main organization I'm sort of currently still connected to. Um, my own research at the moment is looking at trying to look at the phenomenology of the out of body experience, so really going into what actually happens for most people, not what is assumed to happen because of what's written on the internet, or but actually doing it in a scientific way and sort of studying what really happens, and asking questions about things that are usually not asked questions about. Like, for example, how do you see when you're in your experience? It's usually just assumed that seeing is always the same, that hearing is always the same, but it's not the case. These things vary a lot. Like, what is your physical or non-physical experience like when you're out of body? What does it actually feel like? Do you have limbs? Do you have a body? Are you a traveling sphere? Are you a sort of cloud of consciousness? What is it actually like for you? So all of those kinds of questions, I think, give us a greater understanding of the experience, and give us a greater understanding of what might be going on, and by extension, the possibility to induce the experience more effectively. Because if we really know what's actually going on, it's going to be easier to induce it, rather than just coming from belief systems and stuff that's not been really tested.
Yeah. Actually, I think I heard you, or I can't remember which podcast it was, talking about sort of hue, which I thought was quite interesting. And you just touched now on, like, do you have limbs? Do you an orb? from your perspective, what is like, what are the sort of like classical features of a out body experience? Like, how do most people, or yeah, see themselves?
Most people, which might be surprising to listeners, but according to research by Carlos Alvarado and like actual proper research, the majority of people experience themselves as a traveling consciousness. The body is only about 30% of people, the energy body, I mean. So so techniques that heavily focus on energy bodies are probably likely to be less effective because that's not how the majority of people experience the out of body experience. So an example of how a belief system can impact the
Yeah.
sort of methods you might use.
And when you say energy body, do you mean in terms of like, yeah, like because I would say like the thing what I've experienced is almost like seeing a limb come out. So after that sort of like sleep paralysis, I've had it a couple of times, well, maybe more. Well, I've had experiences where I felt like I've gone through my bed, so I could feel the tingling and the energy in, my hands direct, but I hadn't, you know, my eyes were not open, let's say, and I've had that a couple of times. And then another experience I had was actually opening my eyes and seeing almost like a limb. The way I experienced or described it was almost like as I was a mannequin. I could see a mannequin in front, like an arm, because all I did was bring my arm up, and I was like, oh my God, and the room was really light. But I've heard you talk, and you said it earlier around the sort of like green, grey hue. Is that something you see in all your experiences, or only in the cognitive ones? And yeah.
I've only had it in a handful of experiences. It's been it. I've had two precognitive experiences. So one of the Soho bombing and one of 7/7. So they were both of kind of bombings. And
Oh, you saw
the
7/7 as well. Oh,
yeah,
wow. Okay.
I don't talk about that one as much because I didn't have witnesses in the room when I had
Yeah.
the experiences. The thing with the Soho bombing was there were like people there when I had it, so that makes it a very unique experience, I think, in terms of the history of these kinds of experiences. I don't
Mm.
know of anything else like it, really. So that's why I like to kind of, that one's a very important experience, I think. The 7/7 one, yeah, it was a more, I guess I was more involved with it because the experience actually started with me following the train from Moore Street, not Moore Street when we took it, Moorgate, sorry, Moorgate Station, following the train along the tunnel from Moorgate Station, as it went into the tunnel, and then as it pulled out towards, I think it was Aldgate East. So I followed the train along, and then I stopped, bef- it entered the tunnel towards Aldgate East, but I stopped where I was and didn't follow it anymore. And then the explosion happened up ahead, and I felt that emotional wave like come back and like hit me in the chest. So the emotional thing, the wave part was the same as what happened in the Soho experience, and it also had the blue grey tinge to it. So those are the two precognitive ones I had, and the very first cerulean experience, the blue-grey experience, was the one I mentioned that in the person's sort of first floor terraced house,
Yes.
yeah, near the market. So that was the first time it happened.
Wow. So just to touch on the 7/7, I mean, having that sort of experience multiple times, I mean, how did you take it that second time? Because that's pretty heavy, no?
The second time was more fearful, I would say, because there was a longer gap until it actually happened. And I was living in London at the time. I was conscious of my friends, my family. I was avoiding that particular part of the tube.
Mm.
because where I'd seen it, my dad worked on the tube, um, and he was actually working on Edgware Road station at the time, which was where one of the bombs actually was.
Yeah.
So so there was kind of all this, connection, uh, and with what was going on. I was living in East London, so I was not far from where it happened. So yeah, so there was a lot. Yeah, I was very conscious of it, and I don't remember the exact time frame, but it was a few months gap. It wasn't like 5 days,
Months
like
before.
yeah, like the original experience. It was several months that I was sort of in that sort of situation, and then um, I was actually visiting my mum on the day that it happened, so I had to walk home across London because I was living in Hackney. So I walked across London from my mum was at sort of Edgware Road sort of area. So I walked across London to get back home. So I saw all the sort of chaos all through London and walked past where one of the bomb sites had been and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
it was had a much bigger impact, I guess you
Yeah.
would
The
say.
time. Did it put you off, like, practicing at all?
It didn't put me off practicing OBEs, but I guess I didn't want to focus on having those kinds of experiences anymore. And I I think that has been the case. I haven't had anything similar to that since. I have had veridical experiences and on a few occasions since, but not precognitive in nature. So yeah.
Do you think there was something as part of your setup that, yeah, or your intention where you might have been directed towards those type of experiences, or was it like you said, the need or want to have objective, like a pull towards objective experiences or something?
Um, I really don't know. When people say to me, why do you think you saw that and what impact did it have on you? I guess the major impact I would say is that it led to a greater sense of compassion because it actually led me to start to think more about why people would do an action like that. Why someone would do, say, with the Soho bombing, like why someone would just try to do a terrorist attack with against people who have done nothing to that individual, just a complete sort of random groups of people, basically. And it made me think more about violence, and I did experience things like that growing up in London. I did experience problematic stuff and like violence and mugging and all these kinds of things going on around me growing up, which I'm sure most Londoners have encountered at some point to some degree. Um, and so I started to think about the meaning of all of that, and it led me to start thinking about non-violence and those kinds of things. And so I looked into the work of people like Gandhi, looked into Leo Tolstoy, um, Coretta Scott King, so Martin Luther King's wife, who became vegan and started talking about sort of non-violence, and also Martin Luther King Jr.'s son. Um, so I started looking at all these different people and their philosophies. Like Leo Tolstoy had all this stuff about non-violence and not harming other people, other forms of life. So it led to this sort of interconnected understanding, I suppose, of looking at things in a non-violent way. So you could say something good came out of it, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
So it had a positive impact. So by seeing something that's essentially negative in a sense, it ultimately led to like some changes in my outlook and perception on life.
Do you think So obviously those experiences definitely helped sort of shape, like you say, your outlook and your perspective on things. Did you find that any other oddities happened as a result of having these type of experiences, apart from obviously types of oddities you might get from sleep
Can you
deprivation?
define oddities?
No, just anything that you noticed. That it could be anything, right? So I don't know, a change in you. Do you? Because people that you get, and I don't want to get into again belief systems, but just did you notice anything strange or different as a result of having this that wouldn't be a result of sleep deprivation or just sort of that kind of thing?
I guess just maybe a real sort of drive and uh, kind of desire to learn and to keep kind of expanding in my understanding and my learning. That was definitely something that sort of seemed to come out of that. Because I mean, obviously I was very young when I started doing these things, but if I look at myself prior to learning to do this, I was just sort of you know, a sporty kid wearing my Adidas trainers, and there wasn't anything like, I mean, there was that little bit of this in the background, I guess, but I wasn't really focused on anything. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in my life or anything like that. Whereas once these experiences started happening, it did seem to shift me and to sort of make me more driven by what I wanted to do, more focused on creativity, more focused on learning. Yeah, I think if it wasn't for these experiences, I never would have gone to university. I mean, I left school at 16 with no qualifications. And my dad was a dustman, my mum was a carer. No one had been to university. It was a very sort of poor working class background. I thought you had to be posh to go to university. That was literally my understanding at the time. So it wasn't until I started reading all these books, and I hadn't really even read books that deeply before. But when I had these experiences and I wanted to learn these things and I wanted to read these books on how to do these things, suddenly reading became central in my life. And I started to really dig into all of this stuff. And then that led me to read about things that I never would have imagined thinking about before. So that ultimately led me to think, okay, I want to go to university. I want to do things. I want to learn things. So yeah, it sort of shifted me in every way I can think about, really. If you sort of look at as I am now, my whole life is completely transformed by it, really.
Yeah, like definitely like the drive and sense of purpose and all of those things. Where's that take you now? What's your sort of goal with all of this? Do you have one?
I guess I guess I took a little bit, to be honest, I took a bit of a step back when my father died. And I did move myself a little bit out of the public eye for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, something like that. And I was just sort of focusing on my own inner work and that kind of thing. But doing that again sort of brought me back to my original work and my original sort of feeling that I do want to sort of move this whole area forward. And just I as far as I know, I'm the only person doing, like, actually taking part in scientific experiments, and the only person who's sort of got any like really solid veridical experiences like that in the most people are just coming from the sort of well-worn path of astral projection and the same ideas that were around 200 years ago. And I feel like if I have a role, it's to move that forward and to say there's newer paths and new information. We have so much richer world now in terms of ideas and science and things like that we can draw upon. And I really want to be at the forefront of doing that, and maybe to move even beyond OBEs into wider areas of consciousness research and things like that. So maybe that's sort of where I'm looking to head towards now, to sort of broaden it and expand it. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm focused on. I'm working on a new book, but
Oh,
um,
nice.
can't say much about that yet.
Okay, okay. No, I look forward to it. And yeah, like you said, just obviously aside from funding, what needs to happen to move this forward? What small things, what small steps could be taken to help move this and push it where it needs to be?
I think the research that has been done being respected would be a good step, because then if the older research had more respect and it was more widely known, then I think there would be more openness to do new research and to sort of gain more understanding, and for people, the newer generation of people coming up, to actually engage with science. And I mean, unfortunately, there's the tendency to go down the path of just saying what people want to hear, and obviously it's easier to make a living and all that kind of stuff if you just talk about, oh yeah, it's all easy and you just do this technique, and but that's not the reality, and it's not the truth. So I think what we really need is people who are more honest about it, more open, and say, well, it's not easy, and we've got to learn a lot more about it to really fully get to the point where it will be easy. We could get to that point, but the only way we're going to do that is by learning more about the experience and really understanding it. So yeah, I think the stigma would be good to get rid of a lot of that, which is a lot to do with the skeptical community, unfortunately, who claim to be championing science, but actually undermine research that's being done and just say, oh no, you shouldn't do this research because this is nonsense. But of course they don't know that. They don't have evidence for that.
Yeah. I guess another area that's interesting you say around obviously the stigma that's attached to this. Have you listened to was it the telepathy tapes at all? Have you
I've
yeah,
I've heard about them, and I have had some engagement. I've listened to some of the interviews with the person behind it, and but I'm not very well versed in it. No.
okay. No, because it's I found it quite interesting that so yeah, for people who aren't aware, it's kind of starts off really just about telepathy and but specifically within the sort of non-verbal autistic community. And what I found quite interesting about that, and it is a very interesting podcast. I think it went viral and got a lot of attention. Out of body experiences at some point become a part of it. And actually, I think maybe some of the young people who are involved in it, and I think other people actually, it I tend to see that this out of body experience seems to touch lots of different spaces. And actually is one of the reasons why I kind of got more interested in it, because it felt as though it's almost like the gateway of, no pun intended there, but to a lot of different things. And so for me, it was just more around validating some of that, at least subjectively. But I found it quite interesting. I think Rupert Sheldrake is also in one of the episodes talking about telepathy, but it seems to connect to a lot of these different sort of, I don't know, parapsychology spaces, or these fringe spaces anyway. Um, so I was just wondering, yeah, if you had a take on it. And then the other area, obviously, which is near-death experiences, and I guess obviously it seems to, certainly people I've been speaking to, they tend to become interested in this space when they have lost somebody who's quite close, and obviously there tends to be this sort of linking of those two experiences. I was wondering if you had a take on that at all, and if there's any research that you've come across.
Okay. Well, first of all, I can say, um, talk about telepathy in general. So telepathy in general is really one of the most established psi or psychic abilities, um, especially from the Gansfeld experiments, which uses a mild form of sensory deprivation. So they take a half ping pong ball and place them over each eye, basically to create like a dome effect. And then they shine a red light in your eyes, basically. So you just see this uniform redness um, in your visual field. The reason for the redness is it causes the pupils to dilate, and then that makes your brain think that there's information coming in. But obviously there isn't. There's just this uniform glow. So then what tends to happen after about 15 to 20 minutes, you start to have visual images start to appear. And those visual images can then often relate to a telepathy experiment. So you could have a sender in another room who's trying to send an image to the person in the Gansfeld. So they've got this uniform glow, and on headphones, they're listening to pink noise or white noise, which is just like static sound. Um, but because they have no actual stimulus, visually or auditory, they start to have these images and sort of mild hallucinations. Basically, they start to see things, hear things, and often those correlate with what the sender, the person in a separate room or a completely different building, or sometimes even a different country, is trying to send to that individual. And what they found over decades of repeating and repeating this research is that consistently people score above chance. So you can take an ordinary person off the street, put them in this setup, and they will score above chance in a telepathy experiment on average, the majority. So, and if you control for certain attributes, like people who are musical, for example, often score higher. People like creative types, um, just people who are more on that sort of wavelength tend to do better. In the long-term meditators, for example, tend to do well in these kinds of experiments. So basically, it's a good way of demonstrating telepathy, and it's been done like consistently. So when you look at the statistics on that, um, you basically get very, very strong evidence. Like for telepathy, I think Dean Radin said that it was something like 29 quintillion to one against chance. That's that's the data,
Okay.
which I think is something like 1,000 billion or something. So like 29,000 billion, something like that.
Bloody hell. Well, that's really
Um, so the second part of your question was
near-death experiences.
near-death experiences. So Um, I think out of body experiences are a component of near death experiences. So often a near death experience begins with an out of body experience where you travel around your immediate vicinity, your room, and then you might go down a tunnel. You might find yourself in an alternate environment outside the building, something like that. So a near-death experience often entails more components than a standard out-of-body experience, but an out-of-body experience is often a component of a near-death experience. Some out-of-body experiences do go to the level of a near-death experience, so they have all the same criteria, but on average, it's less common that things like tunnels and meeting relatives and things like that will happen in an out of body experience. So it tends to be that there's these extra layers with a near death experience. But examples where it can cross over is things like a shared death experience. So sometimes
Near-death experience. What?
yes, there's a whole nother category.
Okay.
Raymond Moody, who wrote Life After Life, who coined the term near-death experience, he also wrote a book on shared death experiences. So what that is when someone literally shares in the dying process of someone else. So the most common form is someone will be in the room with their relative, and that relative is dying. And when that relative passes over, that person will either see the process, so they'll see that person passing over, or they will actually share in the experience. So they'll actually come out of body and meet the person the dying person, and literally kind of see them off as they go. Like they'll sometimes go through like a portal, or
They'll sort of consciously be aware of
yeah.
wow. Okay.
So they
Okay.
have like an interaction, and sometimes this can happen with multiple people. There are cases of a whole family being in a room and them seeing a kind of opening happen, and seeing the loved one kind of go off it through a tunnel or a portal or something like that. So those kinds of experiences are called shared death experience, but sometimes they have an out of body component as well. And I had an out of body experience that I would now categorize as shared death experience. I didn't have a name for it back then. But basically, my experience was with a group of people who died in a plane crash, and I had an out of body experience, and I found myself in this cloudy, misty sort of environment, stereotypically sort of afterlife type environment, but that's what it looked like. And at about 150 meters, so there was that distance again that I had in both of my precognitive experiences. They There was a group of people, over 100, 150 or so people, all gathered together. Some of them were stressed and confused and didn't really know what was going on, and others seemed to be quite at peace with what was going on, and some of them seemed to be having life reviews. It was almost like there was a screen opened up over their head, or like a bubble or something, and it was literally, wasn't a bubble, but like I could literally see their thoughts. I could see the images of their like life review around their head. And there was one man I have a vivid memory of, who had a very sort of leathery face, like he spent a lot of time working outside. And he seemed to be having this sort of conflict with his father in his life review, and there was this kind of intense back and forward going on, and he was sort of struggling through this process. And then while this was going on, I saw someone over the far side of the group. I think it was a woman, and uh, she had this life review going on as well, but hers was very peaceful. And she then sort of moved into the mist and just sort of disappeared. Um, so I had these different sort of dramas or scenarios going on between these different individuals in this group. And again, like I had in the Soho experience, I felt like I couldn't go any closer to them. I felt like I should stay at this distance. I felt like maybe I could have gone closer in this experience, but it felt like I felt like I wasn't supposed to. Whereas in the Soho experience, I felt like I couldn't have gone any closer if I'd wanted to.
Okay.
But yeah, so that was a experience that I would now categorize as a kind of shared death experience.
And when did you have that experience? Was it a while ago or
Yeah, that was in the 90s as well.
okay?
So I had a lot of significant experiences then. I've had significant ones in the 2000s, the 2010s, etc. as well. But those really striking ones were quite early on.
Okay. Do you think this is just a random question, again, just based off my own experience. Do you think there's any correlation between your sort of like your youth and the vibrancy of these types of experiences? Because I don't know, it's a bit random, but I find that my dreams just generally like I do have lucid dreams, or my lucid dreams started after having those. But I find that the vibrancy of my dreams is so much more shallow with age. It's just sort of like almost grayscale in comparison to, when we were younger, just sort of like the vividness and the sort of like realness of dreams, just in general. And I don't know what to attribute that to, but I just wonder if there's anything somebody
I,
is
I guess,
a little
I
bit.
guess, I feel like my experiences are actually deeper and clearer now, my
Okay.
out of body experiences, but the those particularly profound experiences seem to be maybe more common in that early, maybe first, maybe 8 years or so. Seem to There seemed to be a cluster of that kind of stuff. But I also wonder if it was because I had no real commitments at that point. I had a very free sort of lifestyle. I still am somewhat like that, but I obviously, with this work that I do, I'm very, very much kind of constantly working on writing and all these different things. Whereas at that time, I was much more constantly experimenting, I guess. Like I would read a book, pretty much a new one every week, or sometimes more than one a week. I was practicing every night, and I was working at night, so I would literally do practice sort of in this sort of late evening and then go off to work. So I had this sort of lifestyle that was very conducive to what I was doing. So I wonder if that could have all had an impact on things. It's hard to say, but then again, I've had like those experiences in the science labs where I've got very good results. Have all been more recently. I've
Okay.
had, several amazing precognitive, not precognitive, sorry, veridical out of body experiences when I was living in Tallinn, which I lived there up until 2019.
Okay.
So there are still very vivid experiences, and actually, even in from around 2010, I started to develop what I call the crystalline state, which is a different state again. So that's what I mean about the sort of depth of the
Mm,
experiences, where everything's sort of, it's almost like translucent, like with daylight sort of feeling, like golden and green, and feels very nature, and like like a summer's day kind of visual component of the experience. And while I was living in Tallinn, I had several critical experiences that were extremely vivid, probably the most vivid I've had,
okay.
with that state, with that crystalline state. So I actually think that they might be related to the visible light spectrum. So I've
Okay.
actually looked at the visible light spectrum and seen that the pairs of colors, so the blue green and the green yellow, and the sort of dark magenta, sort of purples and stuff. Um, those are the beginning level. So when you start having an out of body experience, you tend to see in darker tones and like purples and things, and then it seems to increase up the scale. And so the yellow and green seems to have come later in the process for me. So if you look at the visible light spectrum, you'll see that there's all these sort of pairs where it sort of goes in strips of color. Um, and I also had this. I've had some experiences where I see almost like auras when I'm out of body. So I'm not seeing things in a normal visual way. I see almost like the aura of places, and it seems to be places. So not people or living things, it seems to be places. So if there's a building with a really long history of different kinds of activities, like emotional activities, like a hospital or um, a cathedral or something like that that has a lot of emotion connected with it. I will see that building in a very vivid way, and it looks almost like, heat goggles, the kind of reds and orange.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So
Okay.
so
Yeah. No, go. Keep going.
I
Sorry.
was just going to say, so there's all different types of forms of experience that have unfolded, basically.
Okay. I was gonna just on that touch on that point. Do you find that yeah, that you know you've experienced several different states of consciousness through this, so that you can classify, or, maybe consciousness states within OBEs even, right? So a bit like, I would go back to Gateway, almost like it, at least the way I processed it was like the different focus levels could take you to almost like different consciousness states. Is that how you see things as well?
Yeah, I think it's a continuum. I think that there are many different states and levels to it. I think even we were talking about telepathy and precognition, and we give these things labels. We sort of categorize them. Oh, this is telepathy, this is precog. But obviously, these are just terms that we've attached to things. I think they're all a part of what I would call psi, or our innate psychic abilities.
Like different
If
wavelengths, almost like a bit like light, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And
Mm.
and when all of those things come together, all of those wavelengths, if you like, rather than them being separate, we experience something more like a whole conscious experience, so an out of body experience. But they when so I think in some ways it's unhelpful to divide them all up, but in other ways it is helpful, because if we're going to study them, obviously we need to kind of look at, is there a difference? Like, does something different happen with precognition, say, from telepathy? And then there are some researchers who think that precognition is the basis of all psychic abilities, that they may all stem from that they may all be some kind of retrocausation or something like this. So there's all different theories out there. Edwin May, who was one of the key researchers with the remote viewing, the whole area of remote viewing, Edwin May feels that all psychic abilities have some basis in precognition. So yeah, there's a lot of different ideas, I think, in terms of what's going on, but they seem to be on a real continuum, and they're all interconnected, I think.
Got a couple more questions, so I won't keep you too much longer because we've been talking for quite a while. But you talked, several times about the emotional aspect especially when you were talking about the precognitive, sorry, experiences that you had. Did you have those in any other experience, or do you have that emotional wave, let's say, or like, in other experiences that you've had? And do you have any thoughts on what it
Not
be?
the wave, no. Um, I I I I feel it was possibly related to people actually dying, and I've only had those two experiences where there was anyone kind of where I was present with anyone dying in any kind of way. So that's my theory, is that it's something to do with that, but I don't know. But no, I haven't had that in any other kind of experience. Um, but emotions, yes. I mean, even just a plant, or something like that, you can, in an out of body experience, you can just sort of connect with it, and it's hard not to be emotional when you sort of experience that whole sense of the core of that living thing's life. In a sense, you get this sense of the cycles of life and the kind of connections of all life, I guess. So it's almost like the golden rule, or the idea of sort of treating others as you would treat yourself, that essential core ethical principle, or empathy, or compassion. When you experience the existence of something else or someone else, then it it becomes that you identify with that, because you can see that that person or that living thing has the same, maybe not the same, but some desire to continue, and that has an impact and a profound effect, I think.
No, that's, yeah, for sure. I mean, this whole conversation has just been so enlightening in terms of, my thoughts on this, and I would love to experiment a little bit more and maybe even talk to you a bit more about this. But the last thing that I really wanted to touch on was creativity. How has your creativity or your creative work been shaped by all of this? Have you found that you have been more creative as a result of these types of experiences? How would you, yeah, sort of, yeah, see, how do you see the two things?
Um, Obviously, it's a bit hard to prize it all apart because it happened when I was so young, like it began when I was quite young. But um, I felt like right from the start that there's a sort of energy that might even be related to healing, actually. But there's an energy, like even with the vibrational state, there's an energy that comes with it. Um, and after my experiences, I often feel like stress just dissolves away when I have those experiences. I feel both calm, but also full of um, a kind of spark of energy, like a spark of kind of creative intuition, maybe you'd say. So when I have those experiences, it just makes me kind of, I don't know, open to do something new or something experimental and keep kind of trying out new ideas and things. So I think that's where the creative energy goes. And in more recent years, it's been in writing. So I kind of focus it towards both personal sort of creative writing, like my poetry and stuff that I've never published, but you know, I write
Oh,
that
you've got
kind
to
of stuff.
publish them. What are you waiting for?
Maybe at some point. Um, And then photography, which is sort of a hobby. You know, I do quite a lot of photography. I used to exhibit it quite a lot, but I guess I also didn't want to. I moved away from art in a professional sense because there's something somewhat soul destroying about your art becoming like a production line. Like you know, you just got to kind of make this work constantly, churn it out. And at a certain point, I decided that's not how I wanted to approach it. And I wanted to do it for the love of doing it and not because I felt obliged to because of, you know, because of doing it as a job or whatever. So, so yeah, but, so I channel that creativity in many areas, but that energy that I was talking about, I think that is really the driving force with it. I would find that after an experience, I would just want to write, or I would just want to draw or paint or go for a walk or, you know, just do something. There was just this sort of drive to it. And then I realized as well that I feel it might be related to healing modalities in the sense that those vibrations, those energies might come from a similar place. They might be related to each other. So I think that if you can channel the energy from an OBE or from the vibrational state, I think it can potentially have a healing benefit.
For
So
you, I was going to say when you're saying that, you're talking about this sort of like sleep paralysis vibration, that rush of energy that you get, or are you talking about something?
I'm not talking about sleep paralysis because I've never
Okay.
had sleep paralysis.
Okay.
And I don't do OBEs from sleep. So I do them from a conscious waking state. So
Okay.
So yeah, I tend to actually avoid sleep paralysis because a lot of people find it terrifying. And so when I'm teaching it, I tend to, if someone can get into that state and be comfortable and they're good with it, then fine. But in general, it's not my method for teaching it because it's just stressful and scary for a lot of people.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I don't, maybe because I've had them so often now, I don't find them scary. I get excited by them because I'm like, oh, but I'm really curious as to whether or not it's the same or that energy because
I
it's
think it probably is,
the
yeah.
same thing. Okay, because it is like it's just it. I would always, I mean, and obviously I've never had an epileptic fit, but I always feel that's the closest thing that I could maybe assume it matches to. Is just like it's your body, just this energy, overwhelming energy that takes over your body, and you have to just wait for it to subside before then attempting to
Well,
quiet.
there's different degrees of it. When I was writing Navigating the Out of Body Experience, I was interested in whether there were differences between the vibrational state and other states. There are other states. It's not just the vibrational state. There are other what I call transitional stages or pre-states. So there's the void state, for example. A lot of people will go to an out-of-body experience via a kind of void-like experience. There are more auditory transitional stages, so noises, buzzing, things like that, but they don't actually feel anything. So there's no vibrations in a physical sense. And then within the vibrations, there's a huge spectrum. So you can go from what I experience is a very mild, like as if I was floating on waves, just sort of laying on the surface of water and just floating on waves. And then I get a feeling of sort of electrical shaking or tingling, like vibrating mixed in with the wave sensation. So that's how it commonly happens for me. But then some people describe very, very intense experiences, almost like feel like there's an earthquake in the room
Yeah,
or something,
yeah.
So it there's a really, really big spectrum. There's no right and wrong. Again, as I said, it all comes down to the individual. Everybody's different and has different ways that things unfold for them. And it's important to remember that. It's not that your particular vibrations or your particular transitional stage has to match with everybody else's. It's this work is about mapping and understanding the unique complexities of how it will work for you as an individual.
So you know what? It's really interesting because now, like, certainly what I've picked up on, or the way that I was able to get to that state most commonly was, like I said, the waking up in the middle of the night, maybe setting a sort of intention, which you alluded to as well, you discussed earlier. And then I would always have something on. So actually, I tried the binaural beats, but even if I was just listening to something, it's almost like something that's kind of keeping me slightly semi-conscious. So I'm sort of half awake. I find that it's actually, and then I'd feel the vibration. Do you think the vibration, are you inducing the vibration, or is the vibration, are you becoming like, do you have a sense of which way it is? Like, is it the, you know what I mean?
That's a good question. It's an interesting question because I think as well, I think that the whole idea of inducing an out-body experience is actually a bit of a misnomer.
Mm.
Um, I think in a lot of ways, what we are doing is we are creating the conditions for an out-of-body experience to unfold naturally. Um, it's a bit like, I don't know, if you put certain things in place, certain things will happen. You put a seed in the ground and you put water on it, you'll get a little shoot. Now, does that mean you created a plant? No, you created the conducive conditions for that plant to come to be. And I think it's similar with an out of body experience. When you put all of these components in place and you do it in the right way, the chances are very high that an experience is going to unfold. The more you do it, the more you kind of learn what the triggers are. But really, it is more of a mapping the territory that will lead to the experience rather than inducing it, because there's no I press a button and this is going to happen. It just doesn't work like that.
That's-
It's
yeah.
about responding to the conditions and then it unfolding. So in many ways, yeah, I think you're correct in what you're saying about the vibrations but I think it goes even further to the whole area of the out of body experience, really.
I'm sorry, I said that I was done with like questions about 10 minutes ago, but I kept going. I keep finding more and more. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. You're just full of so much knowledge and wisdom and just experience, obviously. And
Thank you.
hopefully we can talk again because, yeah, I've had the time's just flown by. It's been brilliant chatting to
Yeah,
you.
it's been really nice. It would be great to do it again.
Fantastic. Well, brilliant. Well, have a great day and thank you so much again.
Thank you.